And so earlier in this week, you may have filled out a survey online that was part of your pack, which talks about your resilience to uncertainty. So why did you fill that out, and what does it all mean?
Yeah. Sam Conniff is here to tell us more. Sam is most recently the creator of the Uncertainty Experts, which is a unique hybrid of online learning, interactive documentary, and psychological intervention. He's the author of the international bestseller, Be More Pirate. Now, Sam has had an amazing range of jobs for an amazing range of organizations. Get this, he's won Entrepreneur of the Year, Agency of the Year, the Queen's Award, and many others. He maha ngā tohu. Heaps of awards. He's a consultant to brands from Rolex to Red Bull and a mentor to many entrepreneurs and innovators around the world. Please welcome to the stage, Sam Conniff.
Kia ora, and hello. And how are you? Good. Good. Wow, it's been amazing, hasn't it? It's been absolutely incredible throughout the day. I've been sat at the back getting increasingly nervous at the standard that I'm having to come to meet. But there's been a consistent theme throughout the day, which has been very lucky for me. We've heard it in every single talk. And it's been the uncertainty, the ambiguity, and our ability really at the unknown, tackling these great big topics that are there to inform us, but can also sometimes just feel like they overwhelm us. So to kind of set the brief of the next 34 minutes, I'm going to try and move us to this capacity for handling the unexpected, because we all know how it feels, but we don't really always know how to respond, and we certainly don't always respond as gracefully and as elegantly and as fantastically as these wonderful fellows. When those knocks come, and those knocks will come, if there's one thing we can be sure of, uncertainty is going to keep coming, and it's going to put us on our knees again and again and again. So the challenge is how we respond, how we get back up, and how we make something fantastic as a result of it. Now, I know that uncertainty isn't everybody's favorite topic. In a semantic review of research papers and the internet, 90% of the time that we hear or read the word uncertainty, it's phrased within a negative sentiment. So of course, we've been conditioned to view it as a dark and scary place that we race towards, not feeling fully in control. But if I have my time with you, well, pretty soon we'll be thinking about uncertainty in a wholly different way. It'll be the bright, the pink, and the glorious uncertainty. But I want to pull on some strands that I've heard today. And it'll be really important that we don't just address the issue of uncertainty as a cognitive one. We have to understand it as an emotional aspect and something that we feel. So today's talk is both story and science. I'm the least academic and scientific person, so to discover myself as a scientist in the last couple of years, leading the largest ever piece of research done into the human impact of uncertainty, really triggers my imposter syndrome a great deal. But we're going to turn it into some live science, because it's that point in the afternoon when we need a little extra energy. So I need some volunteers to join me on stage. There's already some huge faces of awkwardness and discomfort down here as everyone rushes forward to take part in live science. Don't worry, I was anticipating your response to this uncertainty. So during the break, I came up here, and this is what it looked like, and I've placed several markers under several chairs. You see, this is how we will discover our volunteers. So to find out if you'll be taking part in some live science, will you please reach under your chair and find out what you have there, and then hold your hand aloft so we know who is taking part in the Uncertainty Experts experiment today. There's some very light looking. You need to actually look. Come on, make an effort here. There's some people just not looking, resolutely, I'm not playing. I refuse to take part in this silly game. Okay, ladies and gents, it's okay. There aren't any markers. But the science experiment still holds true. How uncertain do you feel, and where? Where in your body do you feel it? And it's not a nice feeling, is it? No one particularly likes the glass cage of emotions that uncertainty represents in all of us, but it's the most important thing to hold on to that feeling, and we're going to come back to it. So please register where you felt the uncertainty in your body. There's a reason that it's so unpopular. In fact, there's two research papers that I will draw on. One is called The One Fear to Rule Them All, and it argues that the fundamental fear of humanity is the unknown. And that throughout our lives, the unknown, the ambiguous, and the uncertain inform all of our decisions. And there's another piece of research which back it up, which probably brings it home better than anything else. A series of participants, nearly 1,000, were given a choice between a game that you can play that was always ambiguous endings, or the chance to give themselves an electric shock. Which do you think people chose? With unnerving accuracy. About 86% of people would prefer pain. And this plays out in cancer diagnosis. People would prefer to receive a negative diagnosis than remain in a space of the unknown. The impact of our relationship with the unknown is profound, and it informs so many of our decisions and actions, consciously or subconsciously. So I've asked you some questions, and we've had a relatively good response, about 150 as it stands, but as I put my slides together for this morning, 73 people have answered. I asked a number of different questions. What worries are keeping you awake at night? This sums it up: work, finances, and Earth-destroying asteroids. Seems about reasonable to me. You've covered the full spectrum there. There was quite a lot of existential threats. There was very much, well, actually, I can show you. I can show you exactly what came out. It was very interesting, actually. I've asked this question a lot over the last 2 years. Climate came out here more than any other group that I've spoken to, even though that is arguably one of the greatest threats and uncertainties. But much more than any other group as well. This consistent thread around work, life, children, parenting, relationships, it kept coming up. It was really interesting. So I delved further and asked you what uncertainties at work get in the way, and I think this sums it up as well. Fear of failure, budgets, and senior leadership. Like in senior leadership. But as we dug into this, it was very interesting to see what the threads were that came out as well. This horrible sense of feeling stuck, the difficulty that we have in relationships. AI did come out, possibly because we were thinking about it so much today, and once again, climate crisis. As I read, there were 75 at this point, 3 different questions that I asked, so 220-odd specific lines or words that you gave me about how uncertainty makes you feel. I had this increasing sense in my body, trying to interpret what was going on with this group of people. And it was this feeling that things just feel a little bit out of our control. And I say that sensitively and cautiously because it's not a nice feeling. It's a bad feeling. I know that feeling, and I know it really well. It's a scary place. And when we are in a place of fear, it's very hard to access the one antidote to fear that always works, which is hope. But when the knowledge that we are seeking is so overwhelming and so difficult to comprehend, hope doesn't always feel like a safe space. And I say that with deep empathy to anyone who's experiencing that kind of sensation in response to so much uncertainty. But we're going to try and delve into that. And certainly from my point of view, I can only tell you that this work has helped me profoundly in moments like this. In fact, this was me in a moment like this. This is me a couple of years ago. I was, as the introduction gave, once a best-selling author and award-winning entrepreneur. But it all came to a close. I left the agency that I'd done so much work with because there was so much change in my life, and there was so much change in the world, and I felt an imposter, and I felt that it hadn't necessarily worked. And I wrote a book, to challenge my own imposter syndrome. I'm dyslexic, non-academic, and I tried to do the thing that scared me the most. But I was also going through the biggest tragedy of my life in getting divorced. And with 2 little kids, the feeling of kind of shame and overwhelm was a lot. And as I came into the pandemic, being a best-selling author, traveling around the world, speaking to lots of people, wasn't a business model that looked pretty healthy. And I found myself in the most difficult time of my life. I was applying for insolvency and a job by the end of that year, and I'm not sure which one scared me most. But they're both pretty horrific. And in my frustration, looking for guidance in this profound moment of uncertainty, what I found was the kind of global leadership that we largely had on offer, who in a really profound moment of not knowing could never ever tell the truth, which was simply, we don't know. And I think this is a very difficult paradigm for all leaders at the moment, when the only answer can honestly be, I don't know. How to say that in a compelling way that people want to follow because we desperately want to be told what to do. But in times like this, the opportunity of creativity and this fragility is so hard to step into when I don't know is the answer. And so I went looking for people who could tell the truth of this, and I found them. I went speaking to communities of refugees that I've mentored who've become entrepreneurs and CEOs. I went speaking to the young people that I've worked with for many years who've been in the justice system, people who've been gang leaders and drug dealers who are now business leaders. I spoke to people who'd been in depression or homelessness, people who'd transitioned gender. I spoke to real people whose everyday lives represented the profound uncertainty that we often misunderstand or overlook as we look to a single layer of experts in our lives. And in these stories, I found something so useful. I found practical tools for overcoming uncertainty. I found inspiring stories, and I just found reality. And so I assembled them. And I called them the uncertainty experts because 2 years ago it felt like we were lacking any experts in real uncertainty. And I didn't know how to pull people towards my story, so I started recording them via Zoom and asking questions of my audiences to prompt them into their own understanding or better appreciation of uncertainty. I began to have this thought in my head. It was a bit like an interactive documentary, and I thought, that sounds cool. So I called it the world's first interactive documentary that scientifically increases your uncertainty tolerance. It wasn't that yet, but I went on Fiverr and paid $10 to make a poster that made it look like that is what it was going to be. And I gave myself 6 weeks to bring to life, because I was on this precipice of uncertainty, something built on story and based on science that could help other people. So almost exactly 2 years ago, this is how I announced it to the world.
It's not that I don't feel fear. I most definitely feel fear with everything that I do.
I was scared of being overwhelmed by the darkness, by the uncertainty.
They put the gun against your head, and they pull the hammer back, and you can hear the mechanism creak.
And if I can become a boxer, having never done it before, I think it shows that anybody can do things. You just have to build up to it gradually.
For all of humanity's history, the predictor of life outcomes has been our ability to deal with the unknown.
And that means that you can create what you couldn't previously create. Because now you know more, so you can do more. You see more, so you can be more.
So you get a sense of my incredible cast and their remarkable stories, and then to back this up, I created a behind-the-scenes cast of incredible scientists who specialize in uncertainty. The empathy designer to the Finnish government, the head of the decision-making in uncertainty laboratory. What an incredible niche. The dean of experimental psychology, whose specialism is on uncertainty. And I assembled them behind the scenes to help me try and understand what it is that we can do to help other people as they navigate profound uncertainty. And that was what I asked you as well. I asked you how uncertainty made you feel. I asked everybody here that question. It was quite interesting. 90% of the responses used negative adjectives. And this is what we were trying to address, the fact that uncertainty makes 90% of us feel pretty awful. The kind of things that you said, and you said with overwhelming consistency, anxiety was the #1 term. About 7 of the responses, about 10%, could balance anxiety and curiosity, or sometimes anxiety and creativity. But on the whole, it was a sense of overwhelm, confusion, being scared, and feeling stuck. So I've pulled aspects of this research project together to try and give you something useful. So based on that, I'm going to focus a little bit on the fear caused by uncertainty and see if together we can do something to overcome it. Now, as has been referenced today, the sensation of change and uncertainty has a psychobiological response. And the reason that we all hate uncertainty so much, or why it can be called the most profound of all, the fundamental of all the human fears, is our initial threat response. When we evolved to stay alive, obviously. And so when an uncertainty comes, it triggers a threat response. And that's typically known as the fight, flight, and freeze response. Everyone's heard of that? You know what I'm talking about, sympathetic nervous systems? In my exploration into science, I learned a number of different science facts that really amuse me. Do you know the other Fs in the sympathetic nervous system threat response? And it's amazing, isn't it? Evolution gave us this thing and then alliterated it. It's remarkable. The other ones that we have, feed, you know what that feels like? I feel a bit scared, feel hungry. Fawn, you're under threat, so you might try and acquiesce your way out of it. Fold, just play dead, pretend this isn't going to happen. Can anyone hazard a guess to what the 7th F is? It's not appropriate for the workplace. But this is it, right? That is your evolutionary response to the threat of uncertainty. Which one are you going to pick when it comes to AI or any of the other uncertainties that we've touched on today? Which one is actually going to help us overcome the challenges that we experienced and that we saw on the list that people responded to? None of them, which is why our evolutionary systems require an update commensurate with the level of uncertainty that we're facing now. And I'm going to try and demonstrate this to you as to why this is so necessary and why this kind of psychobiological, this felt and thought approach is necessary. With your permission, I'd like to do another science experiment. I'd like to make you all scared. Everybody okay with that? I'd like to prove to you that your fear response is stronger in your body than it is in your brain. And that's why uncertainty will make you feel sick, and it will limit you unless you learn to overcome it. Is this okay with you? I'm going to give you a fright. I'll make it easier on you. I'm going to show you an old video, an advert, of a little car driving through the hills, and I'm going to ask you to focus on the little car, and then at some point something's going to jump out and scare you. You with me? All these smart people down here are thinking, well, that's not going to scare me. He's just told me exactly what's going to happen. Well, we're going to demonstrate, even though you know exactly what's going to happen, your body is going to override you. When it believes there's a threat, it's going to release chemicals into your system which will make you feel scared and make you feel uncomfortable, even though your brain knows exactly what's going to happen. So we'll have a little test now between the body and the brain. Let's see who's really in control. Please just focus on the small car as it winds its way through the glorious mountains. You with us? Great. Small car. Wasn't that fun? It was really wonderful to watch, this kind of little sea of shock as it went through the room. Now, isn't that interesting? We knew exactly what was going to happen. We were telling ourselves that we weren't going to be scared, but our body, and there's a number of things that are taking place in that. It's peripheral vision. Anything coming in your peripheral vision, all your senses will go wild for it. That feels like it's a real threat. The scream has been very carefully made, so it goes on an audio level. When our senses are engaged, there is so much more going on than our poor brains can ever compete with. Our bodies pick up 50 million bits of information in the same time the human brain can process 50 million to 50. What a compression rate. If we leave our body out of the equation, we're leaving most of our intelligence behind. Now, something really interesting happens here. If you put a brain in an fMRI scan, well, you don't, you put a human in an fMRI scan with their brain, hopefully. In moments of fear, it shows up, it lights up in exactly the same way. Fear and excitement light the brain up in exactly the same way. So uncertainty has this opportunity to unlock both creativity or anxiety. As we saw, you could already identify there's an interplay between those two things. Now, wouldn't it be wonderful? You know, we know a good surprise, like a birthday party. And then we know a bad surprise, like an unknown caller. Who here takes an unknown call? Yeah, one or two down there, right? It's not the norm, is it? So most of us feel anxious by these things. And do you know what the gateway is? The one thing that determines whether we feel anxious or creative? It is a psychological trait known as uncertainty tolerance. It was discovered by two Canadian researchers in the late 90s when our global understanding of anxiety became mainstream, and it's uncertainty tolerance that is the gateway between these two options. And by increasing your uncertainty tolerance, you will increase your capacity to find opportunity in uncertainty. That's a fact. So here's two sides of this. There's a low uncertainty tolerance, which is me. People are shown with low uncertainty tolerance to be more likely to be divided. This has been shown in numerous election campaigns. People with low uncertainty tolerance are more likely to fall for conspiracy theories, fake news. You know, it breeds division. We're more likely to have self-doubt, be indecisive. There's higher levels of fatigue and exhaustion because uncertainty is a physically felt sensation. So with low uncertainty tolerance, you're more permanently in a state of high arousal. It's a pretty tricky thing. Low uncertainty tolerance is really what the problem is. We think uncertainty is the problem. It's not. It's our ability at it. On the flip side, however, a high uncertainty tolerance has all manner of benefits, almost superpower level benefits. It creates higher levels of collaboration because you can sit with, debate with, and disagree with people that you don't understand or don't even like. We have high levels of empathy, open-mindedness. We're better at making decisions. We can take more time to make less rushed decisions. And it increases our resilience. Now, you might be wondering what yours is. I can give you a chance. You can do a free uncertainty tolerance test on our website. The majority of people who've gone through this, and if there's a large proportion of entrepreneurs here, you're in a high uncertainty tolerance group mostly. But the vast majority of people are in the lower group. So even if you think you're high, this is your friends, this is your family, this is your suppliers, this is your clients. Right? So all of those aspects of uncertainty triggering a more closed-minded response or being tougher to make decisions, this is what we need to be considering. Now, I'll give you a clue before I show you how we can increase our uncertainty tolerance, where this sits, because it's quite hard to get your hands on. It's quite hard to get your brains on. It's a deep subconscious psychological trait. So we'll do a little exercise in where our subconscious is. Would you please raise one hand? Next science experiment. I'll stop doing these soon. And would you take your pointy finger, and would you draw for me on your forehead a letter? Would you draw for me on your forehead, please, a capital letter Q? A capital letter Q. You know what that is. It's a circle with a small tail. Okay, everyone got it? There's some serious thinking having to go on there. Now, if you drew the Q with the tail to your left eye, so that'll be this way, please put your hand up. Okay, that's a good, significantly under half. Right, great. These people drew the Q for me. They naturally and automatically drew the Q for somebody looking at them. You are shown in studies to be better liars. You drew the Q subconsciously appreciating how the world is looking at you. So thank you, I enjoyed reading your Qs. To the other side, who drew their Q to the right-hand side, this way? Aha! So don't get carried away thinking you're not liars. You drew the Q for yourself, which is good, God damn it. You weren't drawing it for anybody else. You're shown in studies to have quite a good, secure sense of place. You're also shown to have quite low empathy. Just draw the Q for yourself. So you begin to see, right? We didn't know that our decisions about the Qs that we draw on our head were being informed in this way. But now we can understand and we can appreciate that uncertainty tolerance is something that sits with us all. It's something that is informing your decisions each and every day. Whether you came here and how you're going to get home, and the tough decisions you've got to make, the decision that you're trying to avoid. All of it is informed by this trait that's already there. And we've already discussed how short our palate is for tackling uncertainty, right? So it's necessary to improve it. I'll give you some further evidence as to why it's necessary to improve it. Who here can see several pink dots? Optical illusions are a really good way to understand how the brain operates in uncertainty. We've heard it a lot today. The brain is an energy-efficient device. It does everything it can to recognize patterns, and then it will go even further to see patterns that aren't necessarily there. So when you step into the unknown, it's incredibly important to know when our brain is seeing things that aren't there. If I start to animate these pink dots, please look in the dead center where the little crosshair is, and put your hand up if some of the dots start to change color. Well, let's just stop the thing, right? Is there actually another color there? No. There's about 4 hours in the day when it's expected that the human brain stops sending messages to and from the eyes because it just thinks that it knows what's going on, often when driving. There was a recent study, 2021, where humans were pitted against rats to spot patterns in random sequences. Rats were infinitely better because humans would just project patterns. When we're uncertain, we double down on projecting patterns. Last one, who can see the white triangle in the center here? It's a problem, isn't it? Because there's no white triangle in the center. There's none. There's just your brain immediately going to the quickest pattern that it can, and so it can then log off and do something else instead and leave the energy to the rest of your body. So in moments of profound uncertainty, when we don't have the clues that we need, our brain will start seeing things that aren't necessarily there. And that is problematic, my friends, and it's why, with all the beautiful analogies today around operating systems, we need to be wary of ours. Wary, and I mean that because in this evolutionary sense, that's where our relationship with uncertainty is formed. We tend to have a negative outlook. Here's some stats that will back that up. These are actually my favorite of all the stats that I'll quote today. This is by the National Science Foundation in the UK. On average, we have about 50,000 thoughts a day. 80% of those are negative or worries. 90% of them are the same as yesterday. A laugh of recognition and familiarity, I feel. 2% of those negative worries will come true. And of those 2% that do come true, 95% of the participants said that that led to some kind of growth in their life. So there's only 5% of the 2% of the 90% that do come true and that don't lead to some kind of growth. That's the real spectrum. However, that's not how our days are lived. That's not how it feels. Okay, so that's a sense of where the uncertainty is inside us, right? It's there, it's already operating, it is our duty to update the systems that we have. So let's take a look out into the world. What's the forecast for uncertainty? I won't spend any time on this because we all know that the only certainty is more uncertainty. But I just like this headline because it made me feel so sick. The easy part, what? So then we'll look to some of the tools that we have, right? You'll all I think, be familiar with the various risk management tools there are. Risk management isn't a very good tool for uncertainty because risk usually just deals with known probabilities and variabilities, math-based models, that, as we've seen today, that can only be based on known knowns. And so it doesn't prepare us for the impossible, the improbable, or perhaps the possible. Then there's resilience, which has got lots of mentions today, and rightly so. For many people, it's a difference between life and death. I know I've absolutely relied on my resilience over the last couple of years, but it's not inaccurate to define resilience as being good at taking the blows. And if the blows are just going to keep coming thick and fast for the next few years, then I want to get better than just being bruised. I want to get better and stronger and faster in response to that. I want my own learning systems to update in response as the blows continue to come in. And then there's my favorite, the management consultant's best acronym ever, the VUCA framework. Why management consultants are so bad at acronyms, I don't know. But you'll be familiar with it, right? It's the volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world that we're in and have been in since the end of the Cold War. The one thing that this spreadsheet-based model of understanding uncertainty fails to do is, once again, to connect with the truth that uncertainty is something we feel. You know, we don't feel volatile. Actually, I feel volatile sometimes. And perhaps we even feel ambiguous, and I certainly have felt complex. But uncertainty is the only one that registers like an emotion. And we need to understand it and understand our feelings with it and how that relates, because that's how we can access the benefits of it. And the benefits of it to us as organizations, leaders, individuals, as a country. The relationship between uncertainty avoidance and innovation is clear. This is 100 different global economies mapped on 2022. And you can see the line is pretty definitive. If we want to get naturally better at innovation, we have to naturally get better at tolerating uncertainty. And then the reasons are, the benefits are manifold. Uncertainty is what's known as a transdiagnostic. It sits behind multiple diagnoses. So I'm working with a company who has 104 emotional well-being programs they've discovered, 52 leadership programs, and 16 innovation programs. That doesn't sound that unrealistic. But if you get beneath them, if you get beneath the various aspects that we're trying to work on, uncertainty and uncertainty tolerance operate as this transdiagnostic opportunity to touch, benefit, and improve them all. Now, I've covered quite a lot of ground. Hopefully, intellectually, you're now with me on the opportunity to get into uncertainty. But I know there's still a question in your mind. What is this thing that he's made? Well, we can get into that, because I know I might as well answer the question now before we get to the Q&A. In the questions that I asked you, one of the key ones was what's the skill you'd most like for tackling uncertainty? And with a huge lead, it was techniques of emotional well-being. And that makes a lot of sense, followed up by decision-making and leadership. So I'll now give you an example of this interactive documentary that we've made and why it has benefit to exactly those kind of scales. So it shows up like any documentary that you've seen. I interviewed these fascinating stories. And then I went and interviewed these remarkable scientists. And then the bit that's unusual is I then interview you, the audience, and I ask you a series of questions. And you reflecting on those questions is what we believe increases the tolerance to uncertainty. There's a scientific assessment before the series and after the series, and with statistically significant results, we lift people's uncertainty tolerance as a result. This is one of the first characters that I interviewed. His name is Carl Loco. He grew up in inner city South London. He was predicted top university places, but he saw his best friend murdered outside the school that he was in. And with the emotional trauma that came around that, he fell out of the education system just before his exams. As a result, he began to run with some of the local gangs of South London, but due to his incredible capacity and emotional intelligence, pretty soon he was running those local gangs. And it was only after a couple of years that he began to realize the error of his ways and turned his life around and began running gang intervention programs to help other young people out of those gangs. He's now a successful social entrepreneur, a profoundly brilliant public speaker. He's regularly found on Necker Island. He's at Prince Harry's wedding. He's all over and he's just launched a multi-million-pound investment fund for other young black entrepreneurs. He's the definition, in my book, of an uncertainty expert. Someone who learned the arts of uncertainty in the shadows and then applies them as a leading light in society. And so I've pulled this clip specifically because it talks to the fear response, which was the majority of the responses that I heard from you guys, and he begins to really articulate how, using emotional regulation techniques, we can push ourselves through the uncertainty. So for about 60 seconds, this, ladies and gentlemen, is Carl Loco.
I had friends on the streets that was more violent than myself, had more money than me, but no one was more courageous. That was my identity. It was Lox is never scared, you know, and I was always scared. But I literally would feel it in my stomach. I could feel it. It got to a point where I could pinpoint where the fear was on my body. I'm just more afraid of regret. I'm more afraid of not leaving a legacy. I am more afraid of not contributing. I am more afraid of not moving the dial. I am more afraid of not breaking the generational curses. What if I'm 50, 60, whatever age, and looking back and like, I didn't move on that when I could have. And then this looming poison that we call regret, I almost stoke that fire. I almost enhance it. You know, I'm like, you don't want that one. That one there, that syringe is the dirty one. If that goes, that's gonna really hurt. You know, so don't, just move.
So I would have these remarkable interviews with these incredible characters who had profound experience of uncertainty. And I made sure that all of them had come from a background or perhaps a pathway that we could identify with, even if their experiences were extreme. And I'd take the stories to the lab. Now, the lab were your classic scientists. They've been working on models of uncertainty for 10 years. They've been brought into existence after the financial collapse. But what they lacked was any real-world examples. And what they could do is take in stories like Carl and then tell me. So I don't know if you're familiar with the term interoception. It's a very hot topic in neuroscience right now. I've included it because your request was tools of emotional regulation. Interoception is a cornerstone of well-being. But it's also a cornerstone of utilizing your own enhanced intelligence. In fact, in some aspects of cognitive science, it's seen as the most radical idea, because this is how we touch into the one place where human beings will always outpace AI. It's being connected, like I said earlier on, between this brain-body connection. Interoception is the eighth sense, right? We're familiar with all the normal senses, the sight, sound, smell. This is the sense of what's internally within us. And it is our ability to interpret and correctly understand the signals that are coming from our body. Kids have terrible interoception. My kids don't know if they need a wee or if they're feeling nervous, which is problematic on a long journey. Adults, also with poor interoception, don't know whether a threat response is bubbling up in a meeting, that their name being called has triggered their decision-making, or an ongoing worry is loomingly influencing their ability at problem solving. So we begin to explain to our audiences, having met Carl, when he's discussing where he can feel the fear in his body, and he's using this ability to go into a future state of regret and then feel that, and then weigh it up next to his fears, what that was doing for him. So with now the story and the science presented to our audience, we'd then ask them some questions. QR codes on the screen would prompt reflections on their phone, and we'd ask people, as I asked you earlier on, where does fear feel in your body? And if it's in your stomach, it's because your body is taking blood away from your digestive systems because it needs to send it to your legs to run away. Or if you feel it in your lungs or your chest, it's because it's drawing oxygen to empower you in that fight-flight response. We then ask the audience about their fears. You know, and Carl talked about his every day on the streets, feeling scared. People would be very clear what their type of fear are. And then we'd ask them his other question. What's the regret that you most want to avoid? What regret do you most want to avoid? And you can probably guess what the responses are, because I imagine you've probably got a very similar response. 91%, and this is nearly 20,000 people, 91% of people said their greatest fear was a fear of failure. That sounds familiar. That's certainly mine. But then when we asked the other question, what is the regret you most want to avoid, it was missed opportunity. And now here is the opportunity, because if you hold them together, as Carl said, try and inhabit the sensation of a future regret, of you missing out on the opportunity that is in front of you, that you all know that it is that you're working towards. And missing that because we gave in to our short-term fears, our physical responses, our automatic responses, well, hell, that's horrible. And here is the trick. The brain doesn't really do with abstract concepts like time. So if you really go into the future, if you really inhabit a simulated future scenario, the feelings that you can interpret are accurate. They're reliable. And then you can take those feelings of this future state, this uncertainty that you face, this decision you have to take, and bring them into your present state, back from the future, and help you inform the decisions today. This is the number one approach that came out of the decision-making and uncertainty laboratory. It started in 2009 after the financial collapse. The world's leading neuroscientists, psychologists, and specialists in uncertainty. And it is profound because it takes the idea that emotions are fundamental to making good decisions in times of uncertainty. We simply cannot leave our body behind. My favorite thing, however, about this breakaway tool that will help everybody make decisions, I use it on a daily basis, is that it was called conviction narrative theory, which sums up one of my favorite things about scientists. They have no idea about their acronyms either. But it's my favorite acronym now in the whole of science. And every time I laugh, the scientists don't seem to understand why it is that I find it quite so funny. But nonetheless. And so you get the sense of how this thing rolls out. So that was Carl. It could be me speaking to Morgan, who served 20 years in prison, or Hilda, who's kind of seen as the African Greta Thunberg, or any of my uncertainty experts. They would explain their stories. I would then use the scientists to bring the science to life, and then I'll ask the audience. And as a result of this process of stimulation and information and then reflection, people begin to move. And the effect was a lasting one. So, final few points to summarize, but I know there's still a question on your mind, which is, what the actual fuck is this thing that he's talking about? I'll take the base insights that we took away from it, the most useful thing that I'm working with. So we asked everyone that's been through the process exactly the same question we asked you. How does uncertainty make you feel? Right? Because it's a feeling, and it's only by embracing and understanding that we're going to be able to get through it. And there was thousands upon thousands of adjectives and responses, and they could all be clustered into 3 segments with absolute accuracy. And your questions, your responses all fall into the same 3. So the first was words like anxiety, sleepless, I feel scared. So we could very easily constitute that as a group called fear, right? And that makes sense. That corresponds with your findings. The second was a series of words like confusion, closed-minded, WTF. That came through a lot. So we'll call that fog, the fog that inhibits the best of our thinking. And then lastly, people spoke about feeling stuck, feeling purposeless, that they'd lost their mojo. So fear, fog, and stasis is the true response to uncertainty, right? Now, I know for a lot of us, we're talking about the concepts like climate or hybrid working or just how difficult it is to navigate the day or technology. But the feeling is what's important. That underneath it all, fear, fog, and stasis is the response. And we can see and imagine how limiting those things are. I'm also particularly proud of this because now my contribution to science also has a really brilliant acronym, which, again, scientists never seem to pick up on. And then we pulled all this together. So I shot it and directed it. I did an online course about online courses during lockdown, and I did an online course about making documentaries. Episode 1, 2, and 3, they're hour-long episodes. They tackle these things. You've seen some of the characters that I tell the stories of, and then the scientists gave me these 3 broad areas of technique to get through them. Emotional regulation, the thing you said you most wanted. I've given you 1 tip towards it in interoception and this powerful technique of CNT. The second episode really delves into meta-awareness, our ability to think and understand our thoughts and thought processes. And the last is around embodied cognition, what we've begun to touch on there, this radical idea that we kind of, in effect, have 2 brains. And then the clients and the organizations that I work with have all come to us saying, well, we want people to move from bravery to courage and from fog to clarity and from stasis to momentum. And they simply don't work like that. They're not opposite states that you can switch between one and the other. And I understand why you want to, but it doesn't work like that. What we've seen from the 20,000 participants is this does work. With tools of emotional regulation, you can't deny fear, but you can turn it into a fuel for action. From a headwind that stops you, it can become a tailwind that pushes you forward. The benefit of time spent in uncertainty isn't that you're going to ever get to clarity, but it will increase your sense of agility. And then lastly, the one that surprised us most, when we're really feeling stuck, when the uncertainty is overwhelming and we can't think, we can't move, the thing that got people out of it was a sense of connection to themselves, a sense of connection to other people, a sense of connection to the purpose of an organization or a material goal. Whatever it was something to believe in. And then all of a sudden, people could move again. So I now find myself very fortunately in a very different position to the picture I showed you, looking so lost and so found. The work has been picked up by organizations around the world. We're running small pilots with very large organizations, and it's incredible to see the effects that it's having. But beyond the commercial success of it, or early success of it, I've become a scientist, graduated as one. This is me at the Royal Society, the most venerable and open institution of science ever on Earth, which makes me particularly proud. My GCSE science teacher once told me that my atoms would amount to nothing. And here we are with published results that push it in the right direction. But even that isn't the real success of it. The real success of it is that now on a daily basis, I hear from the people who've gone through this documentary. And you know what? It corresponds with the first 2 questions I asked you. How does uncertainty show up in your life, and how does it show up at work? There is no one who responds in the singular. Everybody responds with how it's benefited them at work and then at home. because uncertainty is absolutely subjective in that sense. It doesn't care. But I care, and I care profoundly, because I care about stories like this, as I care about you, as I care about the circumstances that I was in, the responsibilities I had, and how uncertainty upset that. And why I really care is that whilst it's difficult, and I know that I'm asking you to do something difficult, the invitation to spend time in uncertainty will never be a comfortable one. But something happens when you do, and uncertainty turns from being a negative force to a generative force. There is this horrible truth, but it was backed up in nearly everything that we heard today, that spending time in doubt, and we all know, everybody here views doubt as a negative thing. But as Danielle was just saying, the studies show it, they prove it. The longer you can tolerate those periods of doubt, the more it's going to become a place of discovery. And then something really remarkable happens. The truth of increasing your skills of embodied reflection, of interoception, of this dual brain decision-making is the simplicity of reflection. And it's something here everybody would agree with me on the importance of, but please tell me, put your hand up if you've made half an hour in your diary for reflection this week. Yeah, excellent, person at the back. You and nobody else. But that's the skill. You know, I wish it was more sophisticated out of all this work and all this science. The longer we can tolerate doubt, the more we're likely to discover. If we want to increase our capacity for uncertainty tolerance, it boils down to reflection. And then when it does, something remarkable happens. Those emotions that we feel become invitations. Invitations to find out something new. And that is why I'm here. That's why I think this is interesting, hopefully relevant to you, because something new is what we're looking for. It is the possible. We've gone through what felt like it was impossible. We've come out the other side of it. And the biggest risk of all now is that we'll remake the world in the vision of those who created it before. And that won't include everyone. And it won't include genuinely new thinking. So if we're going to do something truly new, it's going to be using uncertainty as a technology to explore spaces that we haven't yet seen, but we know must be possible. And so it is not comfortable, but it is the invitation. It's the invitation that I make, and hopefully within here is some of the gift that I can give to you. And with that, I say thank you very much indeed.
That was fantastic. I'll bring you over here, if we can. Yeah, thank you. You sit here, Sam, and I'll sit next to you.
Great.
Thank you. I got a 50.
Did you?
What does that mean?
That means you're slightly lower than average.
Is it, hang on, good lower than average, or?
Yeah, the highest score I've ever seen is 22. High is a low number. It's one of those scientific, strange things that scientists do. It's an inverted scale. But the majority of people are around 55, 56. So you're there. But 45 would be the exact midpoint.
Right. Thank you very much for the questions you've submitted via Slido. There are some really thoughtful questions here. In all strengths are weaknesses. So what is the blind spot or weakness for those who have high adaptability or a high tolerance for uncertainty?
Good question. Everyone's favorite bias is that they don't have a bias. So the blind spot.
What's your biggest weakness? Oh, I'm just a perfectionist. That answer?
Yeah. And the danger there is our biases then go through and inform the blind spots that we can't see. I'm not sure that all strengths are weaknesses. Certainly, as was mentioned earlier on, post-traumatic, there's not clearly understood why some cases of trauma lead to post-traumatic growth and why some lead to post-traumatic stress. But it is in our response systems that navigate us in that direction. And I think the thing of blind spot that we've got to get to, there was a really good Harvard Business Review study on this last year, and gut instinct came out as the number one technique for all leaders. And it's fun in a way because that seems so unserious or unscientific. And that's why this work at the moment is so important. Embodied cognition brings these two aspects of us together, and it's the biggest blind spot. Certainly it's the biggest blind spot I had. Before this work, I just viewed my body as a vehicle to get me to the next meeting. And when you begin to understand the capacity for it and begin to test it, it's like having the blinkers taken off in terms of the blind spots. What does my body think of this? And when it comes down to trust, and the empathy that Danielle was talking about is largely a body-based, feeling-based thing. In fact, consciousness really, some think that's it all emanates from our feelings, not just our brains.
Bit of a left field question. What is the difference in the responses you see, and have you measured it, between people who consider themselves religious and people who aren't?
There's something really interesting that comes through there. There's a huge variety from the things that we can pick up. such as the lowest age range that comes through has the worst tolerance to uncertainty, which biologically shouldn't be the case, but speaks to the society that we're in. People identifying as female have the lowest risk-taking scores, but the highest increase through the show. So one of the questions that we ask is about, do you have a sense of belief in the world? And those people will score really high. But it's only when that sense of belief is married up with a logical approach. To match the left field question, the left field answer is there's this thing called construal theory. And construal theory, it turns out, is a really great technique for getting through uncertainty. Construal theory, largely, you have two gears. I have a really profound sense of belief in democracy, in New Zealand, in the Warriors, in whatever is the thing that you believe in. And then I have a really good capacity for dealing with...
Sorry, you have a profound sense of belief in the Warriors.
I'm hypothesizing on some views the audience may have that came up in the what's making you feel uncertain question the Warriors featured. And the metaphor would be like climbing a mountain. You need to maintain the summit in your head because that's the motivating belief, but you really need to focus on your daily steps. So the people who have the highest tolerance to uncertainty, yes, they have a belief, but they also have a really good sense of what the next thing is they need to do.
Fantastic. All right, won't you join me in thanking Mr. Sam Conniff?